Hello everyone, and welcome to the Munch Museum. My name is Zinata Miri, and I am from the Educational Department. And as you might know, the museum is closed because of COVID-19, but we are taking you backstage to see how we work here at the Munch Museum. As many of you might know, we are moving into the new Munch Museum, which is placed at Björvika. And to do this, we need to stabilize, pack, and transport all of these different paintings that we have here at the Munch Museum. So I am lucky enough to be working with all of these fantastic people, knowledgeable people here at the Munch Museum who work with this process. And one of them is from the conservation team, who we will meet today, Linn Solheim.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Paintings Conservation Studio. I'm a paintings conservator here at the Munch Museum, and right now we are going through the whole collection to get all the 1,200 paintings ready to be moved. And as you can see, it's quite cramped here at the moment. We have lots of paintings. We are 7 paintings conservators working here side by side with the approved distance between us to keep safe. And I thought I would show you my workstation. And this is where you can normally find me most days, looking through a microscope like this, down onto the Munch paintings. And I use different types of tool to see what's going on the surface. One of my most important tools is probably a flashlight. We use this in combination with kind of magnifiers, so we can check out the surface properly. And we make something called a raking light, and we just check the surface in raking light to see if there's anything loose, like new fragments or flaking paint coming up off the surface. And if that's the case, then we use very fine brushes, and we use organic glues of different types. And this is a favorite. This is a silicone spatula or small chisel that we use to kind of very gently poke this flaking paint so it kind of lands back onto the surface. And yeah, this is the patient.
This is the patient. So what are you working on right now?
Well, right now I am working on one of our vampires. This is the so-called pastel vampire from 1893. It's made on cardboard, as you can see, and it's made with pastel. And it's probably a composition study or a sketch. And I will show it to you properly. I'll just wear my gloves again so you can see it properly.
Oh wow, look at that. So this is the vampire, you said, but it also changed title, didn't it?
Yes, it did. The vampire motif was a part of a group of paintings. They were called Love, or the Love Cycle. And this painting was called Love and Pain, which has a very different kind of value to it, or a different meaning than the vampire. So it was Munch's friend, one of the bohemians that Munch hung around with in Berlin. He was called Stanisław Przybyszewski. He was a Polish author. And he kind of interpreted this motif as the femme fatale and the vampire, basically. And apparently Munch liked the title because he kept it. And he kept developing this picture. We have, I think, 5 painted versions and this pastel. And then we have several. It's being repeated both in drawing and prints as well.
So the motif is very interesting, and how the connotations change once you change it from vampire to love and pain. But There are some differences that I've seen from the different paintings, from the one in 1893 and this one pastel. So one of the differences is this background where we see a shadow in the background in contrast to the completely dark background from the vampire from 1893. Are there any other significant differences that you could tell us about?
I think you're right that it has changed quite a bit, and I agree about the background. The painting kind of have just those two in focus, and it's very dark. But then I also thought about her hair, that at this point it is still hair. She's leaning over him and kissing him on the neck, while in the painted version of the vampire, this hair is kind of, her shock of red hair is pouring over him, almost like blood. So that's where you kind of get the new meaning, and that's where the vampire kind of enters the whole thing.
So you mentioned that this is done on cardboard. So why did Munch paint on cardboard? Why did he use that?
Well, I think early in Munch's artistic career, I think it must have been what he could get his hands on. It must have been something to do with availability as well. Probably also something to do with funds. He didn't have that much money, so we see that he uses lots of small pieces of cardboard, artistic boards, which is kind of a board that has a ground layer on. And he uses them again. He uses the front, the back, he turns them around, probably to kind of really use it properly. And then Munch is a prolific artist. He keeps kind of drawing, sketching, painting throughout his life. We have a massive collection that he left behind. Like we said, 1,200 paintings and something like 18,000 works on paper. So it's something to do with availability. But then I also like the theory of art historian and Munch scholar Gerd Woll, she's kind of thinking about if this was part of kind of Munch's rebellion as an artist towards the kind of bourgeois ideas of what an artwork should look like. And it's very much the opposite of that highly finished, classical, traditional oil painting. So it's a good theory. I like it.
It is a fun theory. But could you tell us what that entailed for your work in particular? The fact that he painted on cardboard and that he used pastels.
Absolutely. The cardboard is it's a fragile substrate, or for a painting, just because it's very light sensitive. And like anyone has probably handled an old newspaper lying around, it turns yellow and it gets really brittle. So when you touch it, it just goes to pieces. That's because the newspaper is really acidic, but this is also what happens to pictures on paper or cardboard. So it's light sensitive. And then on top of that, he has used pastels, which is probably one of the most fragile methods in a way that you can use for drawing. Also charcoal has the same kind of problems, that it's very little binding media, meaning it's very little glue or something that surrounds the pigment particles, leaving almost just bare pigment particles lying on the surface here. And it has this beautiful kind of velvety, like you can see up here, almost like a velvety surface. You can see this as well in different artists like Edvard Degas ballet dancers, for instance. It has kind of this feeling to it, a soft feeling to it. And it gives this intense color, but it also makes the artwork really susceptible to vibrations, for instance, because these pigment particles will move around on the surface if this is being shaken in a transport, for instance.
Of course. So we've talked a little bit about the title and a little bit about the motive, but the history of this artwork. Are there anything in particular that is striking or that is interesting about this one?
It is, and it's quite a surprise at first when you see it and don't know the history. But this used to be the back of one of our screens.
Wow!
And it was split down the middle. The cardboard was split in the middle sometime in the 50s. And I found these in the old conservation archive. We call them the red files. And it's a really helpful documentation to have. It kind of contains the history of what happens to this work. And this one says, for instance, you can see here, it's like old handwriting, September 1969. This study of the vampire was earlier the back of M122, which is just the registration number, the screen. And the board was at one point between 1947 and 50, split in the middle. And the two pictures were glued up onto a masonite board and enhanced with wooden moldings. So, and it also says that you can see handwritten letters and numbers that were made after Munch's death. Because that was something I was wondering about. I was like, what's this? What's going on? You know, yeah. The registration number is 122. So that's a bit peculiar. But it's we have several paintings that have gone through this process of being split down the middle. It's a massive procedure. It's not something we would have done today because it's very high risk of damaging the pictures on both sides. And some damage probably happened because of the fragility of both these works.
So we see that thin line of cardboard right here, and then is supported by something else.
Yeah, you can see it if you look at the edge here, which is why I took off just one side of the frame. This is the cardboard just going down into here, so it's just a few millimeters of cardboard. Then you have the masonite board, and then you have these wooden moldings on the back. So it has really changed the artwork. It's a massive intervention.
Absolutely. It's now the history of the object, as they say. But so could you tell me a bit more about how Munch himself treated his artworks while he was alive?
Yes, sadly not so gently. And I heard that we have in writing that he referred to his paintings as his children. And if that's the case, I'm glad he didn't have children because they have been treated rather roughly. He traveled a lot in his life. He worked in different countries. He worked in Warnemünde, in Berlin, in Paris. And of course, he brought the paintings with him back home. So they were probably shipped on trains, put in a crate, shipped on a train, taken out again, up on a ferry, and then back home. And then at the end of his life, he buys the estate Ekeli, just outside the city centre, and he kind of gathers his whole collection around him. All his paintings and all his drafts and sketches from his different properties. And it's a massive collection, and some of the works are enormous. I think the largest one we have is a sketch for the Alma Mater. It's a motif. It was made for the university's concert hall down in the city centre. This is a sketch for it. And it's 11.5 times almost 6 meters.
That's huge.
And that is enormous. That's huge. It's not that many. I don't think you have many canvas paintings on that size in the world. So he had to roll these pictures, put them where he could, probably in his barn, in his stable. He made outdoor studios where he kept art, indoor studios where he kept art. But we see this in the collection. We see tide lines, water stains, sometimes bird droppings, and yeah, it really, the condition of the collection today is really a result of that period and how they've been stored, and also, of course, his technique.
Of course. So we are then inheriting remnants of his work and not necessarily a collection. But could you tell me a bit more about the effects? Because you had a whole team of conservators who traveled up there and tried to systemize everything up at Ekeli, where Edvard Munch died. And are there anything that negatively affected the artworks afterwards from conservation?
Well, it is, as you say, it is a very different collection than most museums have, because it is everything he left behind. They started with a massive conservation project, probably because of that. and they went through the collections, and they did a lot of things we wouldn't necessarily have done today. And it's something like the splitting of these boards, for instance, but also what's called a lining, which is where you glue the original canvas up onto a new one. Almost a bit like the one lying behind here that you can see is the canvas underneath.
Yes.
And it has done much good as well. They were probably using what was cutting edge at the time, but they have also used, on some works, too much heat and too much moisture. So it has squashed the impasto, which is kind of the thick paint standing up. That's been squashed down. So sadly, there is some damage as well. But it's also done good things.
Of course.
So yeah.
So it's a complicated situation.
It's a complicated situation.
Yes. So I have another question, which is, will this artwork, Vampire, survive the test of time?
Well, if it's up to me, then of course it will. But what we're doing is we are trying to slow down time in a way for these pictures. We're trying to control the things we can control, like the light, like the humidity, like how we lend them, and that we treat them really carefully. And also by doing this type of conservation work. But of course, in the end, everything will disappear, but we will try to make it last for many, many generations to come. That's our thought.
Yeah, so that is the hard work of the preventative conservation techniques.
Yeah, that's preventive conservation, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing this with us, Linn.
You're very welcome.
And thank you so much for following this video. Please comment all of your questions for the Q&A afterwards, where we have Linn, who will be answering all your questions regarding the vampire, and also our expert panel. Thank you very much.
Hello followers of Viking.TV. If you saw the video just now, you saw me in the painting studio, and now I'm here for about half an hour to answer any questions you might have regarding the conservation of Munch's work, or the picture we were talking about, or anything else about the Munch collection you might wonder about. And I can see that I have already received some questions. And this is Helen from San Diego. I thought I would start with that one. How often do you need to conserve a piece of work, and when do you know it is time to do so? That's a good question. In conservation, we think about something we call retreatability. We try to use only materials that will last for a really long time, but also we try to use techniques and materials that will make it possible for future conservators to treat the work again, that it won't be difficult, that we won't make things even more difficult in the future. And we try not to restore or conserve anything we don't need to do. So when it comes down to the Munch collection, it's basically when we see loose fragments of paint on the surface. Sometimes also we could clean a surface as well if it is really dusty after years of being exhibited without glass, for instance. So it could take many, many years, but sometimes when paintings are often on loan because they're popular kind of masterpieces or the key pieces we have, then everything that painting goes through, the vibrations during transport and handling, could lead to new damages, and then we need to treat it again when it returns to our museum. So it depends on the painting and the condition of the painting, and what's been going on, what's happened to that painting. Let me see here, there's several here. Have you ever worked on restoring any other artist's work than Munch? And have you seen significant differences in the restorations or conservations of Munch's works? Yes, I have been. When you work in one artist museum, you do work a lot. I do work a lot on Munch, but the Munch Museum's collection also contains more modern Norwegian collection called the Stenersen Collection. And we have lots of modern Norwegian artists from the start of 1900s. Of course, when we receive all these wonderful loans into the museum, and we have exhibitions with artists like Van Gogh and Gauguin, and these wonderful internationally very well-known artists, we also check the paintings with the couriers traveling from our lending institutions. So I get to study and see a lot of paintings that does not belong to our collection. So yeah, I have worked with different artists. Let me see, this is Lene from Oslo. Have it happened that it was not possible to repair a painting, or you had to give up due to fragility? And then also, of all the paintings you have restored, which piece are you the most proud of? We do have some paintings in our collection that are in a terrible condition, and it's kind of, you can kind of divide the collection a bit, because you have some paintings that they haven't been looked at and they haven't been treated for a long time, and then you can do some conservation work and then they're kind of fine in a way. They are in a good condition afterwards. And then we also have a lot of these sketches, for instance, that were never meant to be on display, and they have been rolled up and left outside, some of them in the snow, and they are, you can see the paint medium and the paint layers are completely broken down, so they don't have any adherence to the top of the canvas anymore. Yes, they are definitely a type of painting that we can't really, of course we could kind of glue everything down, but then we would completely change Munch's intention for that painting. We would change how it looked, we would change the saturation of the colors. So we don't do that. We try to keep it looking as Munch intended it to, and that means that some works will never be in a good condition. They will always be fragile. And then the second one, she asked, of all the paintings you have restored, which piece are you most proud of? Yeah, which one? Good question. I think, strangely enough, it might have been something very different from Munch. It might have been a portrait from one of the Cambridge College collections that I treated when I was an intern at the Hamilton Carr Institute in the UK. And it was a portrait of a vicar, I think, or someone from college, and it was completely overpainted, much later overpaint. So we managed to take the whole layer of overpaint off, and then you can really see the original underneath, the original kind of Tudor white sleeves and his hat and everything. And I remember being extremely proud of that. So that was fun. And this is Stig from Oslo again. Does Munch's technique and choice of materials make his art particularly vulnerable for the test of time? Yes, it definitely does, because Munch was an experimental artist, and he seemed to be kind of chasing this look in his paintings, at least in the start of his career. He was kind of searching for this dry surface in a way, very unlike the traditional kind of fat and oily classical oil painting. He wanted to take his art in a completely different direction to that, and he experimented with his paint. He bought ready-made paint, but he added chalk, for instance, or more pigment, or he added more media, and he used kind of spraying technique. So he diluted paint as well. And some of these kind of experiments he made made the paintings look absolutely wonderful, and really kind of with intense colors and this matte, beautiful surface, but it's also really, really fragile because it's almost no binding media whatsoever holding the pigment particles down onto the surface. So he has made the life as a paintings conservator at the Munch Museum rather challenging from time to time because of his technique and choice of materials, so definitely. Alice and Marty from near San Francisco asks, was that piece that you showed as a painting unto itself, or was it the artist's study or sketch for one of his famous vampire paintings? Well, at least when you read the reports and the early kind of written notes about it, they do definitely talk about it as a sketch or a compositional study. But I think our treatment has changed a lot regarding how we kind of see these pieces as well. I think before they used to be just regarded as sketches and maybe not that important. And you could see that on this pastel vampire, for instance, that not only had they split the board into two, they had also kind of scribbled on it, just written the registration number 122 and also like the measurements of the board. So they must have really regarded this as something less important and really just a study or a sketch. But now, for us working in the Munch Museum now, we see that as one of our really kind of strong things that we can show. We can show kind of Munch's technique and how he worked with developing a painting. So I'm not sure if Munch meant this to be picture hanging in an exhibition, for instance. We don't really know that, but it is beautiful in itself. It has this kind of character, and you see the composition transitioning from this early version and then later into our famous vampire painting. Let me see. This is Danielle from Lake Orion. Talk about the lighting and temperature in the conservation room. Is it consistent? Do you turn off the lights after you finish your day's work, etc.? Yes, definitely. In all the rooms, the museum keeps art, like the painting storage, the paper art storage, the exhibition rooms, and also our studios. We keep a really strict kind of climate control, both when it comes to temperature and also when it comes to relative humidity, just the humidity in the air basically, and also light, of course. So we cover the paintings we have on our tables to block out light and to also stop dust from settling on the surfaces when we work. We're in between the hours when we work at them, and then we turn off all light that we don't need. And also in the storage, for instance, there is a light that turns on only when you enter the room, and it shuts itself down to try and keep the light to a bare minimum. And if you've been to our museum or visited the Munch Museum or other museums for that matter, you can sometimes see that some rooms are really dark. They're really and the lighting of the paintings is almost so low that you feel like you have to stand there for a while to really see the picture. Your eyes have to adapt to see it properly. And that is because then you are probably looking at the painting that either has maybe it's painted on paper, or it's made on cardboard, or it has a pigment in it that's really changing color, for instance, from light. Let's see. How few, sorry, just a moment. This is Barbara from Berkeley, California. How fugitive are the colors used in the sketch in pastel? Enjoyed your description of difficulties in preserving these Munch works. Thank you, Barbara. What we're doing right now is we're going through this research project with a machine called the MFT. It's short for microfading, and the microfading technique makes it possible to us to study how materials change when they are subjected to light. So we can measure both like really small kind of spots on the surface where we can check the pigments and also the substrate like the canvas or the cardboard or the paper to see if that will change through light damage. It's a big project and we have just started it now. It will continue into the future. And it's interesting because when it comes to the paper collection, everyone kind of has this knowledge about paper and how paper is fragile to light, but we have thought much less about it in the past when it comes to painting, because you think of an oil painting as being somewhat more stable and it can kind of withstand more. But then we see that some of our beautiful red pigments, for instance, will really either fade or go dark when susceptible to much light. So that will really change some of our most famous paintings if that happens. So that's something we're working with at the moment. And Jerry from I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, Beach. What's your training for the work that you do? Here in Oslo, it's a master's degree at the University of Oslo. You have to start with doing either archaeology or art history, then you do some chemistry, and then you can apply for the master's program either in painting conservation or in object conservation. And they accept very few students every other year, I think. And then I also did an internship in Cambridge at the Hamilton Carr Institute. So that's the way I ended up being a paintings conservator. Robert from Malibu, California says, do you have a favorite piece of Munch's work? Do I? I think I have several. I kind of tend to change a bit when I'm working at the painting for a long time. That turns into my favorite all of a sudden, because you really get to like intensely see these paintings up close, and sometimes we work on them for maybe months. And you sit there looking at them every single day, and you discover new things the whole time. You discover his brushwork, and you see the way he's used colors and the way he's mixed colors, and you really get into it. But if I have an all-time favorite, well, I do like the Madonna. Maybe she is very famous, and it's maybe cheesy to say so because she's so famous, but I think she's beautiful. And also his painting technique when it comes to the Madonna is wonderful. You don't see it when you see it from afar, but he has used very dilute and thin paint. He's probably diluted kind of a pink paint with turpentine or something and sprayed it onto the surface. So it has these tiny droplets all over it that almost makes it look like you see her through this veil almost. It's kind of this, yeah. So yeah, Madonna. Jeannie from Charleston asks, with so many paintings to care for in your collection, do you prioritize by more than the immediate need for restoration, such as the painting's monetary value, complexity, popularity, or some other factor? Yeah. Yes, like a lot of museums, we get lots of questions from other museums to lend paintings from us, and that is often, they often want, you almost feel like some paintings are kind of in vogue at the moment. Everyone wants that particular painting, or they've seen it somewhere and they want that one, and they ask about the same paintings over and over and over again. And then of course we do end up treating parts of the collection more often than paintings that are never asked for. But also, we kind of touched on it in the video, but because we have this peculiar collection where we don't have this curated collection where art historians or the board of governors or someone have kind of hand-picked paintings that they wanted in their collection. We have this collection and it comprises of everything he left behind. So we have sketches, we have fragments of sketches, we have unfinished paintings, we have highly finished masterworks. So some of our artworks were never meant to be on display, and some of them will probably very, very seldom be on display. But we keep them as reference materials as well, because we also use them to get more info about what materials he used and how his motifs developed, for instance. And yeah, let's see. Sorry, just a moment to jump a bit. Harriet from New York asks, have you ever had any accidents while conserving a painting? Not at the Munch Museum, but of course we are only humans, so sometimes we move extremely carefully when we are around these pictures. But then again, we are also used to doing that. We do it every single day. We handle and we move and we look very closely at these surfaces. But of course, sometimes you kind of turn around quickly and you bump into your microscope and you're like, blah! But no, luckily no serious accidents while conserving a painting, and definitely not at the Munch Museum. So I probably hurt myself a bit trying to avoid it, but not the painting. Let me see. Jerry from Kent asks, what medium is the hardest for you to work with in conserving works? Well, if I interpret medium as the type of paint or the type of drawing material he uses, then pastels are definitely tricky. The pastels we have in our collections are normally on cardboard or paper, because it is kind of a drawing material. So they are the responsibility of our paper conservation department, who specializes in works on art and the damages that happen to these type of objects or these type of pictures. But also it is really tricky to conserve these types of paintings where the surface is so dry that any material you use will almost kind of make the saturation of the paint layer change slightly. So we have worked with that for many, many years, and we have developed techniques, and we have gone abroad for courses, and we have really trained ourselves to be specialists in handling very matte, very dry, and very powdery paint layers. So we, as a conservation department, we have made a lot of articles, and we do talks around in the conservation world, because this is something we really know how to do. So we have our techniques that we can use, and we have our types of glue that we can use that we know will not change the surface of these pictures. So that is a big challenge, but we've worked with this for many, many years. So yeah. So I have time for a few more. Let me see. Lots of questions here. John from Reading says, you talk about the layers of the painting, but is the work you just presented oils? Not quite sure what the layers of the painting means, but the work I presented, the vampire that I showed you, is a pastel. So it's not oil paint, it's made with pastel crayons, either dry pastel crayons or oil pastels. And that's what you can kind of see that it is drawn in a way with lines. But with pastels, you can also kind of smudge it with your thumbs, or you could kind of make it look very soft, and it also has this wonderful property that the color intensity is so vibrant because it doesn't have that much binding media holding the pastel or the colored particles down onto the surface. So the pastels we have, they are really fragile, but they are beautiful and really, really kind of intense when you look at them, because of the intensity of the color. So yeah, the vampire I showed you, that was a pastel picture, not an oil painting. Yes. Maybe that light again. Let's see. Stephen from Morristown says, when you lend a work of art, how is it determined how much to charge the recipient museum? Thank you. Well, Stephen, now you're talking to the paintings conservator, and I'm happy to say that I'm not really included in this part of the process. Flaking paint and fragile canvases, that's kind of more my area of expertise, so I'm sorry, but I don't really know that well. Let me see. And then a bit of the same again, maybe, so I will make this my last question, I think. Is many of your paintings so broken down that they are beyond saving? And who in that case has the authority to say the death penalty? Well, I don't think we say death penalties over any Munch paintings, not if it's up to me at least. We try to keep them as best we can, and so far they are not beyond saving, and we are really trying, like I said in the film, we are really trying to slow down time when it comes to the conservation work we do. But we can see now that we have to move our whole collection, and not just the works that we kind of approve for loans, but we have to move everything out of the old museum to go down into the new building in Björvika. And the most fragile works will have to kind of just be almost carried on a cushion. We will put them in a kind of tailor-made box with padding on all sides, and they will travel really, really carefully down to the new museum. So no death penalties, just really, really careful handling of this collection. And I think that was all from me. Thank you for following Museum Mondays, and stay tuned next week for the next Museum Monday. Bye.